What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Daily Fantasy Mailbag Show here on RotoGrinders, brought to you as well by DailyRoto. I'm Britt Devine, joined today by my RotoGrinders friend, Chris Prince, Beer Makers fan, and my DailyRoto friend, Mike Leone. What's going on, Mike? How's it going? How was everybody's Thanksgiving here?
It was good. I had some leftovers today, so I'm stuffed. I'm powering through the leftover food coma.
I had Friendsgiving on Saturday, a week from today. So I've been eating Thanksgiving dinner for a week. I'm not sick of it yet, Beer. What do you think of this? Like, can you ever get sick of too much Thanksgiving dinner?
Oh, no, you can't go wrong. I put on about 15 pounds here over the last few days.
Oh, man, the gym today, I felt like I can't even explain. I was so lethargic. I just felt so out of shape. Way too much food's been going in my system.
Yeah, I mean, even before the show, I'm curled up on the couch. I'm ready to fall asleep, a little nap, and my wife wakes me up. Don't you have a show? Like, yes, turkey setting it again. But good Thanksgiving here. Always a fun day of football, family, friends, food. So working it all off, but excited to get another slate in on another mailbag show here. These are always a good time.
Yeah, you said family, food, and friends. What's Thanksgiving really about, though, Beer? Football, and that's
football in there now. The four Fs.
So
all important. All important.
So we're gonna talk football real quick, guys. This is the mailbag show. You can actually participate in this show. We take questions starting about Friday afternoon in the RotoGrinders forum. There's a thread for this every week. You can use hashtag RGMailbag. We like good, solid, in-depth questions, give you some strategy. And if your question gets used on air, a couple of you guys are going to win some RotoGrinders swag. I know this is a fantasy draft hat, but I got this sweet hoodie. You can win a t-shirt. We got cards. We got some fun stuff for you. If you get your question on air, you win some of the stuff. So it's fun to participate, watch along, and play along, because who doesn't like some of the sweet gear? Mike, before we get into some of these questions, I know we're kind of co-sponsoring this with your guys over at DailyRoto. You always like to talk about your play projections and some of your advanced statistics you can get over there, your adjustable stuff. So tell everybody about all the fun stuff they can get with a premium DailyRoto subscription.
Yeah, we have a podcast each week with Drew Dinkmeyer, myself, and Chris Pacheco. Some written analysis to accompany that, and that's all complemented by our projections, which, as you mentioned, are customizable. We're really excited about that because you have the ability, if you disagree with something, if you think, for example, Arizona is going to score more points than their implied team total is, you can fool around with that, up it to 28 points, and then the projections will automatically update. The value rankings will automatically update. So it's a really cool tool. You can change things like market share of targets, carries, and whatnot, different volume metrics. So you can put your own stamp on our projections. So it's a lot of fun to mess around with when making teams.
Yeah, so we'll have, maybe you can pull up, we'll talk about this in a minute, but have David Johnson's projections ready for me, because I want to see what you guys say on here, because they got to be absolutely off the charts this week.
Yeah, it's pretty high.
So what we're going to do here, we're going to kick off the show here, taking some questions. We'll get into some position by position NFL analysis for you as well here. But Beer, I'm going to start it off with you here. And this question comes from Marco Polo 22 from the RotoGrinders forums at rotogrinders.com. And he wanted to know, can you guys talk about the leverage of fading the chalk in NFL and going with another skill position in the same game? So leverage, he kind of summed it up here. Since David Johnson's going to be one of the highest owned running backs, should we look towards Larry Fitzgerald, or I might argue Carson Palmer, and fade David Johnson? And you can also look at it with the Dolphins running back situations with Jay Ajayi. Is it a sharp move to maybe move off of him with some offensive line issues there and maybe use Tannehill? Maybe not Tannehill, but maybe use a Parker, maybe use a Devontae Parker or a Jarvis Landry here. What do you think about kind of the leverage game in daily fantasy?
I like it, but every situation is different, and I'm glad these are the two examples. You look at, let's start with Arizona and David Johnson. I mean, I don't care what percent he's going to be. It's really hard for me not to play him this week. I mean, the guy's been electric. The guy's done it in tough matchups, easy matchups, home, away. Doesn't really matter. He's going to get his numbers. So very tough for me to fade a guy like that when I know his floor is so high and potentially the highest ceiling on the slate. So it makes the passing game nice low-owned options to leverage off of David Johnson. To me, not a wise move this week. But on the flip side with Miami, there I don't mind it because you have to look a little bit more in depth. And you look at that Miami offensive line, they've been missing a few pieces here. When they were fully healthy, that's when you really saw Ajayi take off and put those 200-yard games together. now dealing with a couple injuries, a couple key pieces may not be there. I don't think he's the slam dunk play that people want to say he is. So it's a great matchup, but there I'm perfectly fine leveraging over to a guy like Devontae Parker, who I really like this week. Starting to see him come on here. Not the best matchup, maybe some of the stats say, but it's San Francisco. You're going to get more plays. I'm not concerned with the lack of passing attempts out of that Miami offense. It's going to be a high-tempo game. He's a big play waiting to happen. So there, I don't mind leveraging because there's other information that you have to dig a little bit deeper for, and most people aren't looking at a thing like offensive line, but I'm perfectly fine with leveraging off Ajay onto a Parker or even a Jarvis Landry this week.
So, Mike, what do you think about this? Maybe we'll talk about Miami here first, because over at DailyRoto, you guys have like play projections, and you can adjust those. And you got to expect Miami, they're going to be able to have one of their highest implied plays of the entire week because, or basically for the rest of the season, because they're going up against the 49ers, who run some of the most plays in all of the NFL here. So even though we can give Jay Ajayi a pretty good workload this week with those offensive line issues that we're going to talk about a little bit later here with another question, is it a smart move? I think he's going to be pretty popular. I think I'm probably still going to use him on my cash teams, but I think you can make a very good case for moving to a Devontae Parker, someone I really like right now in tournaments. He's looking fully healthy. I'm never aboard Ryan Tannehill. I don't think he's very good at all, but you can definitely get aboard a couple of the receivers for him.
Look, we're 3 for 3 on Devontae Parker love.
Nice.
I like that pivot a ton. I think since Ajayi's had some success, you're getting less targets for Jarvis Landry, less of those short targets, and more efficient targets from Devontae Parker. It's a nice team total. So I like that pivot directly. And when considering fades and whatnot, things like this, as Beer said, you got to consider the floor. And someone like Ajayi, he was a good pass catcher in college, but he hasn't shown a lot of pass catching ability thus far in the NFL. And if you're paying on DraftKings, a full PPR site, 7,000 plus for a guy that might only have 1 or 2 catches, all of a sudden the floor is lower. And the question was talking about pivoting to a teammate. The thing is, and we have our projections, touchdowns are binary, right? It's either going to happen or it's not, but you'll see in projections partial touchdowns projected because we don't know for sure who's going to score the touchdown. But that has such a big impact. So when you look at our projections for Ajayi, when you add up his projected receiving touchdowns and rushing touchdowns, it's about 1 touchdown. If for some reason, though, he doesn't get the touchdown and Devontae Parker does, Ajayi, you give him 0 touchdowns, you drop his projection 6 points, all of a sudden he goes from a really good value to, outside of the top 10 values just because he didn't score a touchdown. So that's why you're leveraging with another teammate. You're saying, okay, kind of if the game goes as expected, even just that the touchdowns happen to go somewhere else, you're kind of double dipping there because hopefully you're getting that touchdown by taking the correct player who gets it. And then you're also fading a player who all of a sudden goes from a very plus EV play to a slightly negative EV play because he didn't get in the end zone.
Yeah, you can see this with David Johnson too. He's going to be, I think, clearly the highest owned running back of the week. And as good as his matchup is, both running and receiving out of the backfield against Atlanta, like Mike said, if he doesn't get the touchdowns and you use Carson Palmer might have 3 passing touchdowns and they go to the receivers, and all of a sudden David Johnson, even though he has 150 total yards, if he doesn't get in the end zone, it might not be a great week for him here. So it's very good to kind of leverage off those plays. I think Carson Palmer to Larry Fitzgerald, and I like what Marco Polo was saying here. Using Devontae Parker is probably my favorite. The answer is never Tannehill. It's always one of his receivers maybe instead. I think you can use Parker here. So thanks to Marco Polo. We'll be in touch with you and get yourself a hat, a T-shirt, a hoodie. We got cards. We got all kinds of fun stuff. But thanks for that great question. The next one, Beer, it comes from Tim K, again from the RotoGrinders forums. And this is a really interesting topic because I don't know if there's a right answer. There's so many different viewpoints on this. It's for NBA. I know this is an NFL show, but let's face it, NBA daily fantasy is probably the best daily fantasy sport in my opinion here. He wants to know your process for game stacking in NBA. And that's taking, 4 or 5 players, all from the same team, then mixing around a couple other players around it here. What's your strategies to do it? When should you do it? Why do you do it? How do you do it? There's so many differing opinions here. So let's start hashing it out.
Yeah, I don't think there's one right answer. So it's a great question, and that you'll probably get 3 different answers here from the 3 of us, but all 3 things should be able to help you. So obviously the easy thing to do is you got to look at the Vegas lines, where are the high total games, which games are going to be competitive. People want to look for those 220s, but it's a 10, 11, 12, 13-point spread. Usually you won't get a good game stack out of it. I know we got one with Portland and Cleveland, which looked like it was going to be a blowout from the Vegas spread, but ended up being a high total game. So those are obviously the games you want, the close games, the high total games. And the way I kind of do it, I don't want to force it. I think people overdo it. They want 3, 4 guys from each side of the team. And I don't think you necessarily have to do that. I generally go 2 or 3 from each side, and then you mix and match with some guys out of your core. You don't go away from the guys that you like just to completely, fully stack the game, because the further you go, the less optimal plays you start using out of that game. When you're getting into the 4th option, generally there's not 4 options on a team. Even look at Golden State. You see a guy like Klay Thompson, who was great last year, now very well may be the 4th wheel, and it's kind of shown in his production. So when you're trying to jam all these guys in, you're going to go along with everybody else who's doing the similar type thing, where I go back to my, cash game core, put a few of those guys in there. It'll give you a game stack, plus it'll differentiate your lineup from the people who are fully stacking the game.
So Mike, I want to throw this at you, and this is there's so many different ways we can approach this. So I want to talk about how to pair your guys in a game stack. So what I want to do is I want to take maybe my point guard, and I want him to get the assists combined with another guy who's getting points. So I'll take him with one of the big scorers on the team. One thing I usually don't do is maybe we'll use the Hawks, for example, here. I won't use Dwight Howard with Paul Millsap combined, because I want one of those guys to have a huge game. And because they're both so important at getting rebounds and blocks and defensive stats, it's a little less likely both of those guys have enormous games. So I like to pair up a point guard with a shooter. Rarely will I use 2 big guys that their strengths are both rebounding or both scoring, because I just find it a little harder for 2 big men on the same team to kind of have huge games. So what do you think of that? And then talk about your strategies.
I completely agree with that. I was actually formulating ideas in my head. I was going to say, you don't want to use Blake Griffin and DeAndre Jordan together. You want to use Chris Paul and one of those 2 guys for the exact reasons you laid out. And one of my favorite situations to stack is when you get a team with an injury or 2 and you get a tight end rotation, you get guys that are going to see increased usage because one of, a key player is out and they're playing up tempo and pace. So a combination of a tight end rotation and playing against an up tempo opponent. I love taking advantage of that. That's when I'll go 2, 3, maybe even 4 guys in the right circumstance. We've seen it with the Pacers recently. They've gotten caught in some blowouts on both sides, winning and losing. So it hasn't worked out, but you take Paul George out, that opens up not only a lot of minutes for other players, but a lot of usage, a lot of offensive responsibility, some rebounding. And all of a sudden you got all these guys that are priced, under where their expectations are with Paul George out. And then if you get lucky in a tight game with a lot of scoring, you can get a profit across the board. And as Beer said, looking at the spread, I think if you're going to take a chance on a blowout, for example, LeBron James was under-owned compared to Kevin Durant. I think it was the other night. I think that was the Portland night.
I had all the LeBron James. I just printed some money that night.
If you're going to take LeBron James in a tournament, you might as well, if he's going to hit his upside, the game's going to have to be close. So that's when you want to start taking someone on the other side. And if that game's going to be close, it's probably going to be Damian Lillard or CJ McCollum. So if you're taking a chance in a blowout type of game, you want the right guys on the other side that are going to have to perform to keep that game closed.
Yep. Beer, I want to hit on this too. So game slates, the size of the slates, the type of games, like this is another thing you really need to take into consideration for NBA. So we saw it was on Friday. Every team in the NBA played. I don't know if I should be game stacking on that because there's so many good plays that I really don't think you get an advantage over game stacking. What I want is maybe on the 5-game slates, maybe pick 2 of the games, and I'm much more apt to do it there. First, I think the scores are going to be a little bit more condensed. On the huge slates, there's going to be enormous scores no matter what that you just don't really get an advantage game stacking. So I want to kind of do it on the more condensed slates here. So what do you think of that?
I kind of fall in the middle of that. I don't mind doing it on the bigger slates because you're going to run into less of it. When there's 5 games, people feel the need to stack up every.
Like there's so much given. There's so many. Like there's this way. There's that way. There's a lot of interesting discussion.
People can cover a lot of bases. You're never going to cover all the bases, but the smaller the slates, I think the more stacking you're going to see. In the bigger slates, I agree you don't have to do it, but that's what I want. That's kind of when I want to do it. And what I want to do, I talked about Vegas lines earlier. Sometimes don't pick the top 2, 3, 4 total games. Maybe pick the 5th one or the 6th one that kind of fly under the radar. We see that a lot in NFL. Everyone wants the 53s, 52s. There may be a perfectly good 47, 48 that nobody's really talking about. That's the one that you really want to attack. So kind of keeping your ear to the ground, paying attention to who's talking about what. And sometimes you can find a sneaky stack in any sport that no one's really going to be on. So I don't disagree with you, but I think in 5-game slates, you're going to see a lot more stacking than you do in a 15-game.
Mike, you were making some faces like you ate some bad turkey. So I want to get your thought in here.
We just had that OKC Denver game on a 15-game slate where if you stack that game,
like you won a lot of money, but you didn't win everything basically because there's just so many games on the field.
You had to have exposure to some of those guys to win that's a good game where Beer is talking about it had a high total, maybe not the highest total, but also had a tight spread. And it also, what I was saying with the tight end rotation, you had a bunch of guys out for Denver. So you had Gallinari out, you had Will Barton out. So then Wilson Chandler went off, Jamal Murray went off. On the other side, you had a super high usage player like Russell Westbrook. He went off. And when you get into a game that has such a high total, such a chance of being super high scoring, but also a tight spread, you get one overtime. And all of a sudden, I mean, those guys in that overtime period, you could have gotten close to 30 fantasy points from the overtime period if you had 3 or 4 guys in that game. So I still think you can do it on a 15-game slate. And I think if you look at the tournament winners from last night, you'll see, it was pretty hard to win without probably at least one guy from each side, probably 3.
Oh, you probably had 2 or 3 because you had Jameer Nelson had a huge game too. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot to like in that game. It's a very interesting way. I don't think there's any right way or wrong way, but it's good to just have a discussion about it and kind of get it out there and bounce your ideas off other people. What's good, what's not. I love the discussion. A really good question from Tim K from the RotoGrinders forum. So we'll be in touch with you, and you can get one of these fancy hoodies that I got here. All right, enough NBA talk, guys. Let's do NFL. We're gonna go position by position here. Beer, let's start at quarterback, and we normally start at the top and the high price, but let's do the chalk first. So who do you think are going to be the highest owned quarterbacks this week? Why? And is there any reason to fade them?
I think at the top, you're going to see a lot of Tom Brady, and I think you're going to see a ton of Russell Wilson this week. And Wilson, not only a good matchup, but he's just underpriced. The pricing hasn't had a chance to really catch up to the production. Looks like the 2015 Russell Wilson. He's going out and catching passes. That means they're perfectly fine with his health. They're not worried about it.
8 rushes, too, last week, too. Yeah. He's back.
He's not wearing the RoboCop knee brace anymore, so he's ready to roll, and you've seen it. 25, 25, 25 seems to be every single week. Now you get Tampa Bay, who we've seen week in and week out, a secondary is just terrible. So you combine the matchup and the price. I think Russell Wilson going to be a guy in the mid-range that a lot of people look to. So Brady and Wilson, to me, are going to be the heaviest stone players this week.
Mike, me and you, we're the cash game guys. I think Beer missed somebody. I think the highest owned quarterback this week is going to be Derek Carr at home against the Panthers here. Where do you sit on those top 3 guys?
Yeah, Carr's our top projected value on the week. So I also think at 6,100, he's probably going to be the chalk in cash games because, at quarterback, we always have good options at each price level. And when you're probably forcing in David Johnson this week in your cash game lineups, and there are a few other really good running backs in spots, I think saving that little bit of money at quarterback helps a lot. And we've got him projected for the 4th most pass attempts. He's got 2 good wide receivers in Amari Cooper and Michael Crabtree. The Carolina secondary hasn't been that good this season. They're bottom 10 in terms of fantasy points allowed to the quarterback position. So I like Derek Carr a lot. I think Cam Newton might go under-owned on the other side of that.
He's trash. No one wants to use him.
I like him better on FanDuel just because the
Yeah.
price is better and the scoring system suits him better. But I like him for tournaments in that game as well. But Carr, for me, I'll probably have 100% exposure in cash games, even if I split lineups.
Yeah, I think Carr, like you said, you got to save every dollar you can to get the expensive skill position players in there. I think Carr's where I'm leaning too. Nothing against your guys, Beer. I like him. I just don't know if I have those cash. But if you do, Russell Wilson, and then of course at the top, Tom Brady. All three of those guys. I wrote our DraftKings cash game article today over the week. And those guys, those were my three cash game plays at quarterback. No surprise there. So, Beer, let's talk about some tournament plays here. I'm going to bounce some of my favorite plays off of you and see what sticks. So I love for tournaments. How low owned is Drew Brees going to be at home? I think it's unfathomable that his ownership is going to be below 10%. I know it's against Los Angeles Rams, who have a decent defense, but come on, it's Drew Brees at home. He's going to have 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. We got Eli Manning at Cleveland Browns, quarterbacks against the Browns. You just lock and load, and good things happen. And then on the cheap end, specifically on DraftKings, we got Carson Palmer, who we mentioned up top with that first question, is kind of a swerve off David Johnson. He's 5,300. The Falcons are going to put up points on the Cardinals. This game could turn into a shootout. And that price on Palmer, I know he struggled a little bit, but I'm willing to take a shot on him.
Yeah, Drew Brees, I love. I'm with you on that one. Like you said, he's at home. You can pretty much chalk up 300 yards. How many touchdowns does he get you, I think, is the big question. And you got to think 2 to 3. And he will be loaned. You're not hearing a lot of talk about him this week. So he's a given. Anytime he's at home, he's even thrived in some more difficult matchups than the Rams. Hasn't been great, Drew Brees, but he's gotten the job done. So I'm with you there. Eli Manning, on the fence on him. You know, it's Cleveland. It's a great matchup, but they really want to lean more on Rashad Jennings. They're getting him a lot more involved here. And I just worry that the Giants get out to a lead and they pound the ball away with their running backs. So that's my concern there, but he should also be low owned. And I don't mind the leverage to Carson Palmer. Not my favorite play in the world, but a huge total. It's a favorable environment. The turnovers have been a problem, but this is definitely a beatable secondary. Got a lot of weapons there, not to mention David Johnson. So in tournaments, I don't mind that leverage play. Again, I don't know that I'm pivoting off David Johnson, but in some lineups, I don't mind having some exposure there.
Yeah, I think the Carson Palmer, David Johnson, Larry Fitzgerald, that might be like the pot. A lot of people, you see Ben Roethlisberger, Le'Veon Bell, Antonio Brown. I think the Carson Palmer, David Johnson, Larry Fitzgerald. That's going to be the popular trio of the week here. What about your boy Aaron Rodgers? He's another guy, Beer. I know you want to probably talk about him a little bit. So what do you think about him here? A tough Eagles defense, but he's got 15 touchdowns over his last 5 starts here. There's still no run game. And the Packers defense, this is the best thing. Your poor Packers defense, they've allowed 38.25 points per game over their past 4 games.
Very difficult to watch this team. It's definitely gotten ugly. So that means good things for Rodgers in the passing game, though. They can't stop anybody at this time. Washington, Tennessee did absolutely whatever they wanted to do on the ground, through the air. So I think you see a similar situation here with Philadelphia, even down a running back. Some no-name receivers I think you're going to see step up this week in Toriel Green Beckham. So I think it's going to be a nice offensive week for Philly. That's going to be nice things for Aaron Rodgers and the receivers. Can't trust that run game like you said, but the defense is down. So many guys. On like our 5th cornerback is our best guy. So Philly's going to score points. Rodgers is going to have to keep up. That's going to put him in that 20, 25, 30 fantasy point range again.
All right, Mike, we've kind of froze you out of the show for about the last 5 minutes. So is there anybody else here? Maybe you can expand on Eli Manning. He's someone I'm really looking at. The Browns, they've allowed 25 passing touchdowns this season, the most in the league. They're 31st in pass DVOA over at Football Outsiders. I put a lot of meaning into that statistic. I know Rashad Jennings, he's kind of like a sleeper running back too, but what's your thoughts on Eli and then anybody else you're looking at?
I'm just worried with Eli that the pure ceiling might not be there. He's only top 261 yards, it looks like, once over his last 7 games or so. So that's my concern there. I like Palmer a lot. The guy you mentioned, 5,300 against Atlanta. They've allowed the most fantasy points to the quarterback position. I'm just really surprised that there's not more buzz around Palmer this week.
What about anybody in the mid-tier? You got your homeboy, Tyrod Taylor for the Bills. Any interest there?
I mean, Tyrod with that rushing ability, there's always a little bit of interest, but honestly, he's not within the range of guys that if I'm making, let's say, 10 tournament teams, not going crazy, mass multi-entry, he's not going to make the cut. I talk about Cam Newton in the Derek Carr discussion. I always love Cam's upside. Again, he's got that rushing upside, and Oakland hasn't faced a lot of good quarterbacks recently. So I think that people might be overlooking that this is still a pretty good matchup.
All right, so that's going to about do it at quarterback. Beer, we're going to go to running back here, and we're going to kick this off with another question. This comes from Terrence Robinson at TJ Future CPA. I guess he's working to be an accountant. That's always helpful, too, having being good with numbers in daily fantasy. And he's got a pretty good question here. We talked about Jay Ajayi a little bit here. We know San Francisco, absolutely horrible run defense. I've got some stats here. So they're allowing 5.2 yards per carry. The next highest team in the league is allowing 4.6 yards per carry. San Francisco is allowing 31 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, easily the highest in the league. They're allowing 1.6 touchdowns per game to opposing running backs. Again, the highest in the league. Is that matchup more important, or is all three offensive linemen, very good offensive linemen, being out for the Dolphins more important? How are we weighting this week?
It's a great question. I put more weight in this particular scenario in the Miami offensive line concerns me, but it's adding that with the projected ownership on Ajayi. If we're just talking which one worries me more, I'm looking at the defensive ranking more. But when you add in the ownership, and everybody knows San Francisco's bad, everybody's gonna be on him. It just gives me more reason to go a different direction when I do have these concerns with the offensive line. If it was one guy, okay, I'm not as concerned. Two guys, three guys, you're talking about a whole side of a line, and their line has not been good when some of these guys are out. So it's situation by situation, but with this situation and these guys all being out, I have to lower my expectations for Jay Ajayi. I have to knock him down a little bit, and his price has gotten up where if he's not hitting a certain mark for me, I'm not interested. I'll go a little bit cheaper with a guy like Melvin Gordon, who I think has higher upside in any given week and this week. So this question specifically, I'm worried more about the offensive line than I am about the great defensive ranking.
So what do you think, Mike? We can also add in too, like this is basically the highest expected play total for the Dolphins all season long here. They've got a high team total, basically, again, one of the highest they'll see all season. How are we factoring all this in here? What's more important here, the defensive matchup, the increased plays, or is losing three offensive linemen really worth not really taking a look at Ajayi?
So we've seen with Miami this year, there has been a pretty big disparity from when the offensive line was healthy and when it wasn't healthy. So it does worry me a little bit, but if I had to choose what I'm weighting more, it's that San Francisco defense. They've been historically bad, dead last in DVOA against the run. They're so bad, and as you mentioned, Britt, they inflate plays. So they're bad from an efficiency standpoint. They're bad from a volume standpoint. And, I mean, San Francisco is not going to blow anybody out. So even if this game's more competitive than you think, you're going to get so many Ajayi carries that if I have to weight the two, it's definitely the emphasis on how bad that San Francisco run defense has been.
This is why GPPs are great, because we got two pretty different opinions here. I'm kind of in the middle. I think I'm probably going to use Jay Ajayi on my cash games. I haven't made that absolute decision. Beer mentioned Melvin Gordon. I think I could make that swerve, save a couple of bucks. The mid-tier is pretty good at running back too. Where do you think that's going to lie, Mike?
It's a weird situation because even though I weight the San Francisco defense more in terms of projecting Ajayi and where I expect his point total to be, we have him a top 5 projected value on the week. If I'm going game theory in tournaments, and as Beer was saying, when you layer in the ownership, the conversation starts to change a little bit because, I mean, what do you need out of Ajayi? You need 100 yards and a touchdown, or you need
more than that. You need 100. He's not really you need 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. Or
probably to win a tournament, you need 102.
Yep.
And that's a high bar. I think in cash, you can get away with 101 or sub 102. Yep. And just given this week, there aren't a lot of receivers I like to pay up for. I'm fine using Ajayi. To be honest, what I'll probably do is have him not on all my cash lineups. That flex spot, I'm definitely using a third running back in, and Ajayi is one of a few guys that I'm mixing in that third running back spot. In tournaments, I'm more on the fade side. If he's going to be highly owned, I hate taking guys of that price point that don't catch a lot. We saw it with Blunt against San Francisco. If he just didn't get the touchdowns, he still ran for 100+ yards, but he ended up being a really good fade because he didn't get in the end zone. And you need everything to kind of go right for a guy like that. You need the 100 yards and you need the scores, because you're not going to get bailed out by, 5 catches for 40 yards, which is the equivalent to 1.5 touch. I mean, that's a touchdown and a 100-yard bonus right there. It's 5 for 40, and you're not getting that out of Ajayi, or at least he hasn't shown it yet.
One guy you can get all those bonuses from, Beer. I think clearly the running back everybody's going to be playing this week, David Johnson, Atlanta. They allow the 3rd most fantasy points to running backs, the most targets per game to opposing running backs, the most receptions to running backs, the most receiving yards to running backs, not to mention David Johnson's really good running the ball on the ground here. This is a spot. I don't really care what the ownership is. We've seen this happen for the past couple of games with Le'Veon Bell. We had the Ezekiel Elliott. You just pay for David Johnson and ride the wave this week.
Yeah, I'm going to borrow a line from my boy Dan here. If you're not playing David Johnson in your cash games, well, you're just going to lose. So, Dan, the check's in the mail for the rights there, but I don't see how you don't have him in your lineup this week. I mean, he's the first guy I'm putting in. The floor is so high. The ceiling is high. He catches a lot of passes, so you get that bonus on DraftKings. Oh, yeah, and it's a 50-some point total. So this should definitely be a back-and-forth game. And like I mentioned earlier, he's thrived in difficult matchups against the Jets, against the Bills, against the Cardinals. What's he going to do to the Falcons? So on this fast track here, again, I don't see how you don't have him.
Yeah, Mike, how are you approaching him from a game theory perspective in tournaments? I think if I was using the lineup builder, I think I might just lock him in. I still think he's going to be like 30 to 40%. The price is starting to get high on these expensive running backs. The site are catching up. Hey, everybody's using them. Hey, they're coming through every week. It looks like we've got another lock here. How are you approaching them? And maybe you're playing like a $27, maybe playing the Millionaire Maker or something on DraftKings.
So I generally hate going all in on a guy at this price who's going to be heavily owned. I've talked about on this show before. 2 weeks ago, when David Johnson was against San Francisco, I actually ended up taking a fade position in tournaments. And even though he scored twice, it worked out okay because you had guys like Ezekiel Elliott, Antonio Brown, Le'Veon Bell. They outscored him, some of them by double-digit points, and that was huge leverage. The problem with this week and why I'm going against what I usually suggest is you don't have all those 3 guys I just mentioned aren't in this slate.
Yep.
A lot of the receivers aren't in very good spots, so you probably don't want to roll with 2 expensive receivers in tournaments, and you can fit in one of them alongside David Johnson. So normally at this price and this ownership, I kind of blind fade and try not to overthink it. But this week, given the lack of opportunity cost, I'm with you. I'd be more inclined to just lock him in and go from there.
Yeah, I just think it's just an absolute perfect spot here. Like, what's your projection over there? If I told you over under 28.5 DraftKings points for David Johnson this week, Mike, are you going to take the over or the under?
I'll take the under. We got 26 is our projection.
I'd take the over on that, I think.
Yeah, we've had him as high as close to 30 in that San Francisco game. Mm-hmm. And he's the safest guy besides Le'Veon Bell. Bell gets those, the insane work in the passing game that just gives him an absurd floor. But David Johnson, too. If you look at his game log, the amount of times he's hit 30 to 35 DraftKings points is massive. And I'm a little surprised that even though the game total here is high near 50, the team total for Arizona right now is like just under 23, which surprises me. I'd expect that to be higher against this Atlanta defense. So I'm kind of trying to figure that one out because I like a lot of Atlanta players to go alongside David Johnson too. It looks like Michael Floyd is going to be out. He's a game time decision, but he's missed practice the last 2 days. And that opens up some cheap receivers too. Either you can go to Larry or you've got some cheap receivers. So I don't mind pairing DJ with some teammates in this game.
All right, Beer, enough chalk talk on the 2 main guys. Let's talk some tournament plays here. You mentioned Melvin Gordon. I think you can look at here's kind of a list of all the guys that are on my list right now. So I got Melvin Gordon. I got Lamar Miller. I got Rashad Jennings, Thomas Rawls, Carlos Hyde I think is pretty sneaky. Jeremy Hill, like his price is so cheap on DraftKings, but it's a really tough matchup. He's got to fall into the end zone twice, in my opinion. And gasp Todd Gurley, who's just kind of looking like Trent Richardson 2.0 right now. What's your favorite on that list?
I like Melvin Gordon a lot. Houston has been great against the pass, but not so much against the run, not so great against pass-catching running backs. And he just gets such a high volume of touches and targets in that offense. I mean, he's a shade behind a guy like Le'Veon Bell and David Johnson as far as usage in the offense, but he does it all for that team. There's nobody else that's coming in, stealing touches, goal line work. So it's a better matchup than people think against Houston. Then you mentioned Carlos Hyde, specifically on DraftKings. 4,800 just seems way too cheap. I'm scanning, you scan, and you don't see Carlos Hyde. So he's a guy I really like over there to get my exposure. I mean, it's Miami's been better against the run the last few weeks, but it's still not a horrible matchup. And Chip Kelly's shown they can be up 50, they can be down 50. He's going to be in the game getting work regardless. So
yeah, there was some coach speak too. He was like, you know what, we got to get Carlos Hyde the ball a little bit more this week. So that you got that going for you too.
Right, and he fits well with Kaepernick. So 4,800 just seems way too cheap on him. And you said it. I don't think a lot of people feel comfortable using him. That makes him a great tournament play, and I think they keep this game closer than people realize.
Mike, who you got for some other plays to consider at running back?
I like Jordan Howard. I think people
get out of here. They're going to score like 3 points today.
Well, that's what everyone's just going to ignore. All Chicago Bears players, which I understand.
They're going to face a 10-man box every single play.
I mean, the risk is huge. Don't get me wrong, but he's going to dominate the carries. He had I think he had 8 targets last week and
caught one.
Yeah.
I'm going to keep coming at you. Jeremy Langford, he's involved a little bit too here.
Yeah, but I think that's just because Howard was a little bit banged up. He seems like he's healthy now. The snap count was up last week, and I know he left a little bit for a short time last week, and he seemed like he was fine. I don't know. I just see volume, and I see a running back that's been really efficient despite all the issues that they've had on the season. He's at 5.21 yards per carry, so I think he'll go really, really low owned. And
it's like we talk leverage plays. The Titans defense is going to be like the defense of the week too, so you can get some leverage against them. I know points don't really matter, but like nobody's going to use your boy. I'm certainly not because everybody's going to be on the Titans defense.
Yeah, and I don't know. Did I miss it? Did we talk about Thomas Rawls yet?
Yeah, I got Rawls. I love Rashad Jennings. Lamar Miller, sneaky. The mid-tier is pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, Rawls is my favorite for cash. Another tournament guy, Deion Lewis at 4K. The volume is a question, but you've got to be early on these guys to get the ownership and the right price in tournaments. So if you're taking a chance, it should be this week. And it's a game against the Jets where you would expect the Patriots to be a bit more pass heavy, and that means more Deion Lewis. He looked good last week. I mean, it was limited. He had 5 targets, 5 carries, so he didn't get a lot of usage. But because he's such a explosive player and on a full PPR site at 4K, I mean, you can get him if he gets up to 6-7 targets and 6-7 carries and is using the red zone a little bit. That's enough for him to pay off this tag, especially when a lot of the 4K receivers and someone like Jeremy Hill, another 4K running back, the floors are shaky there. Mm-hmm. And you don't need a massive outing from Deion Lewis, but if you get 16 points, that could be enough.
Beer, I'm going to dumpster dive with you here. Right. Jeremy Hill or Chris Ivory?
I'm not feeling Jeremy Hill love. I get the opportunities there, but the matchup's very difficult. He's not been very impressive this season, and I actually think Rex Burkhead's going to do more than people realize. I'm not sure I'm ready to pull the trigger.
Digging deep.
Yeah, not sure I'm ready to pull that trigger in daily, but he will have a role here. So not sure I can do that. Ivory, I don't love the matchup, but if DJ Yeldon's not going to play, we know it's going to lead to a lot of touches. We saw it last week. He can catch the ball out of the backfield. So Ivory there, and I'm going to throw one more in here. Call me crazy, but I love Spencer Ware this week. Nothing sets up well as far as game lines and spreads. It's a low total. They're an underdog on the road. These are generally all no-nos when you're taking a running back, but we've seen Denver have issues with running backs, pass-catching running backs, and Kansas City wants to win ugly. How are you going to do that? You're going to keep them off the field and keep the ball going to Spencer Ware on the ground in the passing game. So got to pay a little bit for him. He's not cheap, but he could be very, very low owned, and I like him this week.
And, Mike, you're part of the Bills Mafia, sandwiched right between Jay Ajayi and Melvin Gordon is LaShawn McCoy. Mike Gillislee not going to play. McCoy burned us last week with that thumb injury. I know he's got a little bit of a cast. That's going to keep his ownership down. I'm not scared at all. Jacksonville, you don't beat him through the air. You beat him on the ground here. McCoy looks like to be in an absolutely great spot. And where he's sandwiched in price on DraftKings, nobody's going to be using him.
And with Gillislee out, I mean, it probably sounds like not a big deal, but you take away their primary backup running back, who's been pretty good. That is a big deal. You give those carries to LaShawn McCoy. Maybe some of them go to a little bit to Reggie Bush, but he's been awful in the run game. You got a rookie in Jonathan Williams. So at the beginning of the week, I was conservative with McCoy's projection just because of thumb and everything. But you
bump him up.
Yeah, I bumped him up. You take Gillislee out. It is hard to tell, in the passing game, if the thumb injury is going to have an impact, if it's not. I mean, to be honest, none of us know. We don't know. It's a guessing game. It could limit him. He could be totally fine. And if he's totally fine, he's got 100 rush yard and 2 TD upside against Jacksonville. The team total for the Bills, I was really surprised. It's one of the higher ones on the week. You get Atlanta way up there. And then
they're going to get a defensive touchdown against. Like, they're going to get a pick.
You got that factored in. Oh, that's true. But I'm going to have him in tournaments. I think it's completely unnecessary in cash with the guys like Melvin Gordon and Jay Ajayi right there that, to me, are safer. But the explosiveness for McCoy and the ownership looks like a great spot to just pivot off those two higher owned guys in tournaments.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's move to wide receiver. We're going to kick this off. The Siege, he likes to participate on the show when he's not here. So we got to give him some FaceTime, even though he's not here today. And it's something he uses quite a bit here. So, Beer, what do you think of this? Do you use sharp betting trends in your DFS analysis? So, like when the line moves, the total moves in a game. And I do sometimes. I think you can kind of look at it in player props too. Some people just get lost in player props Sunday morning. And I'm like, what do you guys think? And look at these player props so intensely. First, Vegas doesn't really care about player props. They're just kind of a line. And if you use that to override your whole week's worth of research, I think you're probably making a mistake. So what are you doing with Vegas lines? I take note when it's we saw last week with all the weather and the lines just plummeted. I took a huge note in those games. But if it's just like a point or two here or there, I'm not too concerned come Sunday morning.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. You do your research all week and you feel good about a guy, you feel bad about a guy, whatever it may be. And then you come to Sunday morning, everyone kind of throws all their notes away and goes off of some of these player props. To me, you should already have a general idea what the player prop is when you're taking a guy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, within reason, you should be pretty close. If you're not, then you need to relook at your process and how you're doing things. But sometimes things will stand out. You'll see a guy that maybe is a little bit higher than you kind of had projected. That's something to take note of. It may break ties. And as far as the line movement, those kind of things I look at, I'll use it to break my ties. And I like to use them when, say, there's a team nobody's talking about. Like Mike talked about the Jordan Howard. Nobody's going to be on the Bears. If I saw a sharp line movement,
it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
I know. It's just probably a poor example, but
it's an if, Brett. If
it were to happen, then I take note. Like, okay, what am I missing on this team? Well, I dig in a little bit deeper. Let me look at some of these guys, and if they're going to be low owned, Vegas likes them. The smart money likes them. There's a reason why. And we've seen a few of these games this year where this has happened. I think Buffalo in one of those games, Mike, earlier in the year.
Yep.
A good example.
The Arizona game.
Yeah, nobody was talking Buffalo, and the sharp money was on the Bills, and we saw it, and nobody had them in daily fantasy, and it was a mistake. So it's a way to add to your research, but I wouldn't replace what you're researching with some of that stuff.
So, Mike, how do you look at this? I'm personally like so many people get caught up in the props for football, and I think that's like you can just get lost in this. And if your whole week's worth of research, we put a lot of time into this. Maybe some of the casual players, maybe they're looking for something Sunday morning. But if you have a play and you move off of it because a prop on one other guy is 5 yards more than you thought it was, I think you're just throwing everything out the window there. So I don't put too much stock in those. It's the line movements, that Buffalo game Beer mentioned earlier. And when there's like something you can obviously see, an injury or weather or wind, things like that, that's when I'll take note.
All this money is coming in on Tennessee and the line's not moving, guys. So with the player props, I mean, is there anything more involved with confirmation bias than the player props? That's what that is to me. People look at it, and if it's a player they like, they're like, oh, look at this player prop. If it's someone they don't like, they go, oh, it's just a player prop. It doesn't matter. But in general, there's a reason why there are money limits and caps on the player props, it's because the sports books don't set super great player prop lines and they don't want to lose a lot of money on them. They're mostly for fun. So if it's drastically different than what our projections are, I want to look into it. I want to double check. As far as the line movement, the Buffalo-Arizona game is a good one where I think Arizona was favored by 4. Everybody was betting Arizona, and the line wouldn't move. And that's when you say, okay, I'm not going to completely undo all my research, but maybe I lower my Arizona exposure. If there's comparable values in cash games, maybe I go that way. Maybe I sprinkle in a LaShawn McCoy in a tournament. But it's subtle changes unless you get a severe line drop sort of at the end. We had another one. It was a show. I think it was me, you, and Siege with Andrew Luck maybe not being fully healthy, and we saw a big drop in the total for the Colts game. I forgot exactly who they were playing, but I know it was a game that I was really heavy on, and I saw a big drop in the total, and it just, to me, with so many other games with similar totals at that point, it just wasn't worth it to mess around. I had a smattering, but it was my core game at first. When you see a sharp total drop, you mentioned last week with the weather, I was initially going to have some sort of Pittsburgh Steeler in every single one of my lineups last week.
I just went all to Le'Veon Bell. It worked out pretty good.
Yeah, Le'Veon Bell. But in general, though, you wanted to drop exposure off that game when the total moves so much. So, and the other thing, too, is, for example, for our projections, we use the team totals as kind of the point projections for teams. So in that sense, we're always looking at the team totals. The question I always want to ask Siege, I asked him once and I didn't fully get the answer, but if a team has, let's say, an implied total of 26 and another team has one of 29, and then, Sunday morning that 29 drops to 26 and they're both at 26, do you treat those two teams the same, or are you scared off by the one that's dropping? Because what Vegas is telling you is that they're going to score the same, but someone might read into that and say, oh, there's something up with this other team that's dropping. And I don't have a great answer for that. I really don't, other than I mostly take it at face value and I treat those teams equally.
All right, so good question from the Siege. No T-shirt, Siege. You got enough already from the RotoGrinders bin. So that's how you get your question on there, guys. You use it in the thread on RotoGrinders, hashtag RG Mailbag. If you got any good questions, we check it before the show, and if you get on, you get some stuff. So that's going to end the questions. Beer, we're going to speed up receiver here because we spent a lot of time talking over these questions today. So I've got a couple of chalk plays at receiver for you. Tell me if you disagree with any of these. I got Amari Cooper on the high end. I think he's going to be pretty popular. I got Julian Edelman. If Gronk's out, that's basically one of the locks of the week for me. And I got Teach Me How to Dougie Baldwin against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Those are kind of my 3 higher-end chalk options.
Yeah, you're on the chalk. You landed
no
squarely.
Surprise.
So yeah, you're there. So all with good reasons, like you said. Gronk did travel with the team, so keep an eye on that. We'll obviously have that information.
It's a 4:00 game. It could get a little sketchy.
Yeah, I hope we have that information. I'll say, let's be more clear. But Edelman definitely looks like in a good spot. Good matchup. We saw it last week. His target share is going to go up. His touchdown equity obviously goes up with Gronk out of the lineup. So. Don't mind that one. Love Amari Cooper this week against that Carolina secondary. So, and Doug Baldwin, Russell Wilson and Doug Baldwin, very much underpriced, almost on every site. So you are on it with those, my man.
All right, Mike, you got anything else for chalk? Maybe on the low end, I got maybe a Tyler Boyd. Jordan Matthews looks pretty good, but you can't really play that on the main sites. That's kind of like is that the Monday night game, the Green Bay game?
Yeah, it's the Monday night game.
Yeah, so you can't really play that too much there. So, where else are you looking here? I think Boyd's kind of like the cheap receiver everybody's going to go to get a David Johnson and a couple of the other high-priced receivers.
I kind of hate wide receiver this week. I'm really struggling. I think there are a lot of volatile options. So if you're playing tournaments, don't be afraid to go off the board a little bit. I'm not as high on Boyd as a lot of people are. I see some pivots in Corey Coleman. I see both of the Arizona guys and John Brown, whose snaps were up. JJ Nelson, who was losing snaps as Floyd gained snaps. But as I said, Floyd looks like he might be out. So if he's out, I like both of those guys. So I'm probably going to pull a pretty big fade on Boyd in tournaments.
Beer, what do you think about paying up for Odell Beckham this week? It's at Cleveland. They give up the most passing touchdowns of anybody in the league. I'm paying for David Johnson on my cash teams. It means I by de facto, I don't have the money for Odell Beckham. And if everybody's going to be doing that same thing in tournaments, does that make Odell Beckham kind of an elite swerve play?
Yeah, he's always intriguing in tournaments. Tough for me to trust him in cash games because we've seen a very volatile game, not as consistent as a lot of the other high-end options. So I prefer actually pivoting to Sterling Shepard on the Giants. He's cheaper. He's been producing, finding the end zone. So he's the guy I think you can save a little bit money on, who I like in any format. And then we mentioned Devontae Parker earlier. Really like the play there going off of Ajayi and on to Devontae Parker. Price isn't a gimme, but if you look at FanDuel specifically, I think Rashard Matthews is going to be another very popular option based on what he's done. So it's $100 more to Parker, and you probably get him at half the ownership.
Mike, a couple other names for you. Brandon Cooks at home with Drew Brees at home on the fast track tournament option for me there. And am I crazy? Brandon Marshall, Ryan Fitzpatrick reunion kind of going on here. Am I crazy to want to use Brandon Marshall?
Oh, that 6,100 price tag has been messing with my head all week long. I've over-owned Brandon Marshall this season. The game log's so ugly, but I love that play in tournaments. I mean, at 6,100, if you get back to one of those 10-plus target games, and maybe if you stack New England, have Marshall coming back, because you can get 10-plus targets. He's their primary red zone threat. And I mean, the ceiling there, just because of the volume potential, is really, really high on a full PPR site. So I'm with you on Marshall. I like Marshall a lot.
I did the PFF show on Thursday. They had a lot of good stats on Steve Smith in the slot against Cincinnati this week. Keep an eye on that for tournaments. Nobody's going to really use him, and he's very clearly back fully healthy in the man in Baltimore right now. So that's kind of where I'm at. Let's move to tight end beer. Let's wrap this up here. We'll start with the chalk, and I hope Gary Barnidge doesn't play, because I want Gary Barnkowski. The guy scoring all the touchdowns, Gary Barnkowski from last year with Josh McCown at quarterback. Is he going to be the chalk at tight end this week?
I think so. Earlier in the week, I thought, hey, maybe it'd be sneaky, and everybody's saying Gary Barnidge. So who's a phenomenal tournament tight end this week?
CJ Fedorowicz.
Martellus Bennett.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
I talked with Mike about this pre-show.
And nobody's going to go back to that well. And why not? He's in another good spot. Just didn't get the looks last week. If Gronk is out, even if he's in there, I don't mind taking a shot at Martellus Bennett. But especially if he's out, best tournament option on the board, tight ends.
Mike, what do you think for cash games? Pretty much all year, I've been trying to. This is why I like David Carr at the opening of the show. I like to save a little bit of money at quarterback. I like to save a little bit of money at tight end, and I like to get expensive running backs and wide receivers that can really separate myself from the field here. So am I crazy to want to use Barnidge as like my cheap cash game tight end? And if not, where else are you looking?
I think both receiver and tight end are pretty shaky this week. So I really like going cheap at tight end. Barnidge is fine. In that same game, Will Tye on the other side. Cleveland's been horrific against the tight end position. So I don't mind Tye, who's taking command of that tight end position. Fedorowicz, who you mentioned, another cheap guy. I think all three of those guys are in play. If you were to spend up, this is more of a feel thing, but $5,300 for Jimmy Graham feels a little bit light. So if I weren't going to go cheap, I'd probably get up to Graham in cash. But I'm with Beer on Martellus. I know it didn't work out last week, but I saw a stat. He still ran a lot of routes.
He's gonna go from, he was 80% owned in cash last week. He's gonna be like 10% this week, because nobody's going to
be 10%.
Yeah, maybe half of that. 5%.
In cash, yeah, he's going to be sub 10. Maybe he gets the 10 in tournaments. But I also love the Gronk questionable thing being at 425, because I think Gronk will be limited if he does play. And my guess is he doesn't play. And we've also seen a high ceiling out of Martellus if Gronk does play. So I just love taking the chance. If everyone's, we don't know about Gronk, so I can't put in Martellus Bennett, I'm going to really load up on him in tournaments.
So, Beer, one guy I'm not really on, even though theoretically when you take away A.J. Green from the Cincinnati offense, Tyler Eifert, but the matchup's so tough. Baltimore's been so good against tight ends this year. I'm not going to go there. Do you got any takes on him? And then I'm looking on DraftKings, and I had to do a double take, a triple take. Travis Kelce's $4K. I know it's in Denver, but, I mean, he's like a 4,500 player basically anytime. And at 4K, I think that discount warrants a little bit of consideration.
Yeah, Kelsey, I'm interested in, along with Spencer Ware. They're for the Chiefs. They're just too cheap. Somebody's got to do something. Again, the team total isn't as high as you'd like to see it, but that will make them low owned. People look at that total.
He was 4,700 last week, had 9 targets, 7 receptions, 108 yards for 20 DraftKings points, and he gets a $700 reduction.
Yeah, I'm with it. As far as the Baltimore guy or the Cincinnati guys, I'm off all of Cincinnati. There's a lot of love for them. It's a tough matchup. I know it's an added opportunity, but it's in division. Those games are always tougher. It's a great defense in Baltimore. I'm staying away this week. There'll be better spots to roster guys like Hill, Eifert, and Boyd.
All right. Mike, real quick, that's going to wrap it up here. Give me your favorite tool that you use at DailyRoto.
Our collection of volume tools, we have red zone opportunities, targets, carries, snap counts. Just using those is really, really helpful each week to find out where the opportunities are going to go. Volume is king in daily fantasy football.
Yeah, so you can get all that. You get the premium podcast with Drew Dinkmeyer. He's a pretty smart guy. That's going to wrap it up for this show. Thanks for watching, guys. I'm Britt, and for Mike and Beer, we out ya. Peace, everybody.